Well, I'm Gregor Walbring. I'm a professor at the University of Calgary in the Department of Community Health Sciences, program Community Rehabilitation and Disability Studies. So, oh God, in the 80s, long time ago, I was developing, as part of my biochemistry degree, actually genetic tests, non-radioactive genetic tests, and as part of my diploma thesis in London, in the UK. And at the same time, I was beating up on people for using genetic tests, for example, for focusing on Greek population for beta thalassemia and so on. So I work on genetics for a long time. And eugenics really is about, in this case with genetic tests, it's really about negative eugenics, You're trying to detect something which you want to avoid, And so, so I published, since the 80s on prenatal genetic testing, then later on pre-implantation diagnostics, like in the end of the 90s, and so on, Mostly focusing on the negative eugenics, because that's really what so far exists, And now we are, of course, moving into more positive eugenics, which really is that you're trying to ensure that certain positive outcomes are achieved, so you don't have to deselect. So sterilization would be again negative, You're trying to avoid certain things, But there was also the idea, that you put two people together, where from how they look like and from their life, you might predict, okay, they might have good genes, And then you just try to marry them together, Lebensborn was from the Nazis, a program to put the right people together. Singapore was paying academics to get children, So that's positive eugenics, as in the very crude way, because you have to rely on how they lived so far and how they look like. And now, of course, once you can add genes to a genome and modify genes, then it will be more positive genetics, through somatic or germline gene therapy or genetic modification, where you simply add things you want. Well, I'm a thalidomide, so I'm all the time used to being judged, for not fitting the norm, In this way, it's a body structure, having no legs. But so I did all the time disability policy on the side. And so in genetics, because of being a biochemist, very likely I was more tuned into what comes down, because genetics was part of our degree, So it was easier for me to work on that very early on, because there was no barrier of, I don't understand what's going on, and so on. And I all the time did foresight, so all the time looked down the road, where might it be applied, so. And as I say, the negative eugenics, even without genetics, we just, the deselection you can do in crude ways, You can just compare family history and then say, okay, these two, there's something in that family, The film Yentl is based on Yet, with Barbara Streisand, the movie, where in essence there was, two couldn't marry because there was something about some behavioral issues in the family history, of one family, and so the girl wasn't allowed to marry the guy, And so that's how it happened. So you can do this for family history. So all deciding on the negative end what not to do, exists for a long time. I think positive eugenics is much, you'd have to, again, with a very crude way, yes, you compare family history. And if they have look at that, they all have high IQ kids and so on, you say, okay, maybe we put them together, But the interventions on the genetic level, that's only now starting to come. It's still much more, you test for something you don't want, So it's prenatal and pre-implantation diagnostic, So that you then can deselect against an embryo or deselect against a fetus. But we will see, The whole field of synthetic biology is based on that we generate even full new genomes, We really build up a genome from the bottom up, base pair by base pair, And they're not really there yet from the human level anyway, not. But you will add genes, right? By gene therapy, you try to fix the gene, but then you might also add a gene, you think, add something positive to it. That will really take off, I would say, when you have also the artificial womb working. Right? Adding stuff to it, you never know what it does to other genes and what the outcome is. Even if you get that characteristic you want, you might screw up some other parts. Right? And so to use women for that constantly to see what is a viable thing, what you did, it's not really that useful. Right? I mean, you can't really use women for that. Or at least you shouldn't. Right? But I mean, if the artificial womb comes or something where you can grow your product in an incubator, and then you see whatever modifications you did, what actually leads to a viable product, then I think you will see more of that. Well, what is the core of eugenics? Well, simple way is, I mean, right, you want to, I mean, at least according to Galton, you just want to improve the human race. Right, and then it really depends on what tools you have available. Right, and for the most part it was just to prevent certain things, whether it's like marriage of certain people, right, or sterilization of certain people, right, who didn't fit, right, who were assumed that they're having characteristics which are detrimental, right, and then you just try to marry people together, right, you think leads to an improvement, right, and now we get more and more into that you actually can intervene on the genetic levels. Before it was more like deselection, now you can actively, increasingly add things to the gene, and that's what, so you can improve more and more. So in essence, the genetic counterpart to improving our abilities to assistive devices, right, we add to the body, right, where also we see increasingly new abilities, which I mean are linked to the body, right, whether it's pharmaceuticals who might lead to cognitive enhancement, right, or brain-machine interfaces, or, right, so it's all part of the same thing that we want to improve, right, and then there are some people who would say eugenics is only if it's government-driven, right, and I think also, of course, it was government-driven in regards to the Nazis and many places. I don't think that's really the core of eugenics. That's one form of it, that a government can simply buy into the eugenics philosophy and then use it, but it's also individuals driven, right? If you, for example, go to a sperm bank and want to see, right, I mean, right, what characteristics does a sperm have, right, and then you select that, right? It's a commodification in essence, right, and then for whatever, right, I mean, parameters you use, what is seen as useful then, right? And Galton started originally really for the human race, for humans, the next generation simply should be better than the last one. But by now it's, I mean, much more diverse, right? Who wants it? Who has eugenic tendencies, right? Are they negative, are they positive, and so on. Well, I mean, I think Galton was simply the person who, I think, coined the term. Yeah. But the idea of improving the human race, even without using a term, eugenics, right, that of course, right, exists for much longer, right? So I think humans all the time tried, right, to improve on things, right, and it's just, right, I mean, right, and then it became, right, eventually in some places it became really a state who then used this as their philosophy, right? Deselection, we did this before through infanticide also. Right, if you were seen as weak, right, they might have said as for the improvement of our race, but it was to be seen, well, we can't afford it, right? I mean, weaklings in our tribe, right? It's just keeping us down, right? Right. So they might use different language, but it's the same thing, right? I mean, anything which is seen as detrimental, you're just trying to avoid. Well, the German one for sure. Yeah. Right? In some ways, it's, I mean, makes it easy for the eugenicists, because then they say, oh, I'm not a eugenicist because I really just want people to have a choice. Right? They say, as long as it's not state-driven, top-down, then it's not eugenics. Right? But I think that's a cop-out. Right? You can also have, I mean, top-down for like, in ways that I mean, If you do that, well, you get no support, you get no X, Y, Z, and so on. You're all by yourself, and you get blamed by everyone, right? It's not officially government policy, right? You have informal pressure, you have all kind of things. So, right? So I don't buy that. So the Nazis makes it easy for people to sidetrack, saying, "Oh, this is not eugenics, or we are not, because we don't do what the Nazis did. We didn't have the same reasons." Right? But that's just one area in which it played itself out. Well, in the eugenics, I outlined, yes, I think we will, right? We can see this, we're developing more and more tools where it's actually easier and easier to do, right? So as long as, right, and I think as long as we do not, question the, right, the underlying, right, dynamics, right, which lead to the demand for this, yeah, it will be there. If we want all to, right, have power, competitive, efficiency, right, productivity, all kind of things what drives people for, right, improving, because we could easily say, okay, we're good as who we are, why do we have to improve, right? But as long as, the demands behind it which push for it are not taken care of and are still there, yes, right, it will be, the technologies will allow for more and more, and then it will come. As I said, for humans, I think the crucial technology is not actually the genetic intervention. It's actually whether you can grow it outside of the woman, because you can't predict what it will do. And you can't, only because you can then test with a prenatal test or pre-implantation test. Oh yeah, here, well, with let's say the pre-implantation diagnostics that say, okay, we can detect that gene in the embryo. That doesn't mean you don't know how it will grow. And you can't all the time do this and then tell women, okay, now let's terminate the pregnancy, didn't work out, right? Let's go for the, try it again, right? That is not, so you need something where you can grow it outside, then it will become a full commodity. Then I really think our genome will be just, right? Parents will just say, okay, I want to add something so I have higher muscle mass, right? So down the road you can do better sport or whatever you want them to do. It becomes a really commodity where, right, if it really gets that technology-wise, that you can really do that. And then we'll see how the social structure reacts so that it becomes such a commodity, whether they simply stop it by saying, well, it really makes, a mockery of all kind of stuff, right? Well, because, like, for example, makes a mockery really of sport, right? We can't predict. I think no one can predict where the social structure will go, whether that just becomes part of it, and so you just have then the games of the people with the newest upgrade to their body, right? Right, whether they say, well, right, where they draw the line and whether it will be drawn globally or just in certain places different than in other places, right, or for certain purposes, like military versus, civil applications. I don't think anyone can say how it will play itself out, right? But that's the danger, right? Once the technology is there, to just say, oh well, and now we just stop it again. It's, right? And so the only way, I think it's the same as with genetic testing, right? Because they really didn't deal with the underlying reasons why people go for it, right? Then, as long as the demand is there, the stuff will be used. Right? So you can't just regulate, don't use it. Right? They tried this with alcohol, right? The prohibition area. It doesn't work. Right? Then you're just finding ways around it. Right? So you need really a way where the social structure says, well, that's not what we want. So if no one buys the genetic test, then it wouldn't be there. Right? But to just regulate and say, well, don't use it, I think that's, not working down the road. Simple just prohibition never worked. Well, as to improvement, I think it was, all the time about power. Right? You improved and then you could compete, right, outcompete someone, even on the tribal level, right? If you were stronger, right, you were better in wars, right? Your tribe was, could conquer others, right? So it was mostly the, war-driven, right? It was not about, right, that, I want to improve so I can smell more flowers, right? That was never the, I mean, right? It was really about, I mean, right? I mean, right, ways to, I mean, to dominate something else, someone else, some other tribe. And then it was also about simply adding more abilities to oneself through tools, right? Right? I mean, it became, I mean, it's really an issue. It's one thing if you say, well, I would like to use a tool X, Y, Z, but it's really about, again, about the purpose, for what reason, right? Is it so that you're better than someone else? Or is it so you can help someone else? Or is it, right? It's really about the purpose, right? I mean, right? I mean, right? So for the most part, it was not really for the betterment of, right, human belonging and human cohesion, and right? It was really about, I mean, domination for the most part, right? Most of the improvements, right? You had a tool, and then means, right, you could do things others couldn't do. Right? So where does it lead us? Again, no one can predict. We might self-extinct, who knows? Right? We might, well, because no one knows what, right? If people, right, the destruction potential, right? There's something called the lone wolf technologies, right? And it's really, people by now have the destruction potential for individuals becomes bigger and bigger, right? Because the stuff you can design potentially problematic, I mean, right, products by yourself, right? You couldn't do that before. Like you couldn't build a missile by yourself, right? It was most of the time the destruction was based on some of a group, right? The same as you can't really build a nuclear power plant, right? But I mean, the DIY, of course, is the do-it-yourself movement. It's all about doing it yourself, right? You can build a computer by now in your basement. Well, you could do this for quite a while. Right now, you can build your own, right, little kits for nicht genetic modifications, right? Also DIY, right? So you will see more and more where people, right, by themselves can design stuff which has increasing, I mean, right, destruction potential, which means it's less and less, I mean, outside of mass surveillance, it's much and less that you can really even protect yourself, right? Because, I mean, it's one thing to see, like, look at that a country is building a nuclear weapon, right, which takes a long time and so on. But increasingly, I think you will have stuff where individuals can increasingly design stuff by themselves and to monitor everyone, what they're doing. Again, I think it's the same when we say privacy and we develop more and more technologies to ensure privacy. It's not working, right? I mean, the NSA stuff obviously showed us. Yeah. And people were behaving as if it's surprising. I mean, they were all the time, right? I mean, countries were all the time monitoring telephones. The problem was with all the data, right? Who is, in essence, I mean, right, dealing with it? Right? I mean, like with all the information, who is actually extracting the stuff you want? Once you have the computer power and the softwares, right, and you don't need people for that, right? The surveillance is all the time there. So I think really it needs a total rebooting of what we as a social structure think is just things we don't do, right? We just do not do X, Y, Z. It's like Victoria's time, right? She, right, her Knigge's code, right, of behavior, right? She did in Queen Victoria in the UK was deciding, well, people just don't behave properly, right? So they came up with a behavior code, right? And I think it really has to be a social contract that people really, okay, this is what we don't do. If that is not, I mean, then it will just go on, okay? So the technology can't be a solution to a social problem. Never was and never will be, right? I mean, if we think surveillance is a problem, you can't just use more technology to, right, protect yourself. The others will constantly find more, and it's, right, and the ones who, the same with doping, right? I mean, the ones who dope are normally ahead of the ones who try to detect the doping, right? It's all the time a catch up. So I think it has to be a rebooting really of the social structure, saying, okay, we don't do X, Y, Z because for whatever reason they want to come up with, it really doesn't suit us. It's really, I mean, right, it's really we're shooting ourselves in the foot, right, or whatever they want to come up with. But it, right, as long as there's enough there belief that it's worthwhile, right, then it will come and there will be no protection. Definitely not through a technology. Well, I normally see myself as a disability studies and ability studies scholar, right? My appointment is within disability studies. And disability studies really is about investigating the social situation of people labeled as impaired because they don't fit certain ability expectations, right? That's what disability studies is, right? It would question the medical labeling of people. That would be, for example, autism versus neurodiversity, or hearing impaired versus deaf culture, right? And it would question where the disablement is, right? Or ask where the disablement comes from. Is this from the body, which of course certain people would say it is, which is the medical model of disability, or is this really the social environment you live in, right? The problem is disability studies has a lot of cool stuff, like ableism was coined by them in the 70s, by the disability rights movement, which really was at that time used like sexism, racism, right? You used ability expectation as a tool, right, to discriminate against a group, right? The problem is because it's in disability studies and within the disabled people's rights movement, no one else thinks had any applicability to anyone else, right? And that's, I think, it's not true. And so we are ghettoized, right? And people are really, that's right. I mean, it's just how it is. And I think the only way how we get people to understand us, if they see that the dynamic which is impacting disabled people is the same one is actually impacting them also, right? Right? And then we would not have seen maybe that distinction between disability, impairment deselection and sex selection, if one could have made the case that the same dynamic is driving both, right? And ability studies simply says, well, we like abilities, right? And abilities are used, right, often as a political tool, ability expectations, like in ableism, right, as a political tool to justify a hierarchy between social groups. And that plays itself out within the people we label as impaired, traditionally, the people who can't cut it on the gauge curve with normal abilities. But we do the same to women, right? The dominant group male decided rationality is important. The group is in essence in power, male decides women are not rational, right? Conclusion by, again, the powerful group is therefore women can't vote, which we could see as a disablement, right? You disable women by using rationality A as a requirement, and then arbitrarily say that a certain group doesn't have it, right? And you can come up with argument with of course ability expectation which women really might not have, right? It's really up to a powerful group to decide to set the stage on ability expectation in such a way that they can justify their premise supremacy, their right, that top position over another group, right? It would be the same between countries. It's about competitiveness. It's about, right, who is better than who, right? Who is number one, right? And often then you have to use, I mean, right, all kind of measures to stay number one, right? Right, whether it's war, right, whether it's doping to stay number one in sport, or using sport and having your country get the most medals as in essence a proxy, right, judgment of worthiness for your political system, right? I mean, so ability studies allows me to really go beyond. I mean, say, okay, which ability expectations really play it out where, and which stakeholder, which social group is putting forward which ability expectation, and that allows me to really look, I mean, right, look at a discourse before the victim is there. Disability studies needs the victim already where someone is already disabled. I can look at it in ability studies to say, well, if this is where we're going, then of course this would be how the enhanced and non-enhanced will play themselves out, and so on. Right, eventually disability studies is part of ability studies because it's one form of ableism, one form of, right, how we use ableism in a negative way. But there are other ways, right, and I think, right, how we modify the body down the road, it, right, will play itself out in all kind of ways. And the ability expectation we put forward would be a lot about competitiveness, productivity, efficiency, all kind of things which have, right, which are normally not used around, I mean, right, right, what we call today the impaired people. When we say, right, we say, oh, they're suffering, they have a low quality of life. Actually, in the beginning, you will push for this stuff because you have a competitive edge. That's why the powerful group will go for it. And then you come up with all kind of arguments. So you can use this in ability studies. The second part why I want ability studies is you can build a positive narrative, because ableism, as in disability studies, would be negative. Right? You use this to simply negatively impact, to disable someone. But you could easily build, right, a positive form of ableism, right, saying, I really believe in the ability to live in a harmonical society, in a society where humans are in harmony with each other, humans and nature is in harmony, humans and animals, whatever you want to use. You can come up with all kinds of ableisms which are positive. You could say, I believe in an ableism to live in an equitable society. So you could actually use within ability studies, you can build a positive narrative around which abilities actually are better, like maybe for marginalized groups, for vulnerable groups, for the poor, right? Competitiveness obviously doesn't do them any good, right? But you could build a positive narrative around ability expectation, right? Sen and Nussbaum did this with their capability approach, right? They try to see which, right? And that's simply our ability to act. So like Nussbaum came up with 10 abilities one should be able to experience, right? Sen himself says, well, I really don't want to come up with a list. But so there are groups who also try to push for, right, for certain, put out positive narratives around which abilities, do we want to have. And ability studies can investigate that all. Are there some developments who use something we can use, right? Is there a list of abilities which would benefit, right, X, Y, Z group, right? It allows you also to look at, discourses and say who can play with whom, right? If the players involved have so counter, right, ability expectation, which are not really reconcilable, then they will not come together. Climate change conferences is a prime example, right? They never get to anything there. And it's simply because the powerful players and the non-powerful players have totally different ability expectations of what should be done and what they want out of life, right? The one want to have the level of consumption as is, the others want to survive, right, and so on. So you can use this in all kinds of ways and put together. That's why I think ability studies allows you to step back, and then you can deal with all kinds of forms of, right, eugenics, also positive eugenics. You can deal with, assistive devices, with enhancement in general. You can look at, also, is there a way of social enhancement? Right, social structure, how they change and makes that better. You could do all kind of stuff, and disability studies would simply be part of it. It's not like it's gone. It's absolutely essential because we have already groups who are victimized, right, who are already disabled by ability expectation narratives, and that one should be dealt with within, right, disability studies. Without any doubt. Yes, I worked a lot around disability and technology, and it's, I would say, right, and I focused mostly on how technology narrative is used to discriminate against people with disabilities, whether it's the technology of genetic testing, whether, right, and any other genetic, related technologies, but even assistive devices in recent times, right? We published on social robotics, for example, and we looked at the narrative, right? And the narrative around people with disabilities was purely medical. There was not one academic paper who wrote about, we use social robots to increase the social situation of people with disabilities. It was all about, right, they have some deficit, and here we can use a social robot, right, like a therapeutic device. Brain-machine interfaces, very interesting. We have the paper coming out soon, same thing. The invasive brain-machine interface, where you drill a hole into the skull and put some stuff in there, that one is all the time done with disabled people under the patient label, right? And they're all the time called patients, and all the time negative deficiency language attached to it in the academic literature. We have a lot of non-invasive brain-machine interfaces, where you just put a cap on your head, no surgery, nothing needed, And it's used, like, for example, for gaming, right? Like sword controlling Warcraft and so on. And of course, you would never use a medical label, right, for people who want to play, right? So it's the players or the healthy, right? And the interesting part is that the brain-machine interface, the non-invasive one, can do more. When you look at it by now, actually, than what they all the time show on the TV and video clips with the invasive one, right? Moving a robotic arm, moving a cursor. The non-invasive one can do that for quite a few years now, right? So the question is, why did you use disabled people for the invasive one for clinical trials, right? And use, right, and there is the patient and medical, and then you use for the non-invasive one, right, no medical label, of course, no clinical trials, right, industry startups, neutral language of your consumer, right, just saying here is cool for you to have, right, not to say you're a defective product. I mean, it's like selling a BMW. Well, you can't walk fast enough, and here's your BMW to buy, right? This is not getting you people to buy the BMW, right? So there is, I mean, the technology is, so for me the question is, how do we sell the technology? What is the purpose, under what label, right, of the consumer? And then, right, and for whom, and who has then really access to it? Because reality is, we can make these brain-machine interfaces, right? Who really has access to it down the road? Definitely in the low-income countries, the poor, don't think so, right? So it's really, again, for a few, right here, right? And we can all the time say, well, but it will eventually trickle down. Yes, but when? Right? In 200 years, 300 years, I mean, when we look at how many disabled people still don't have access to sanitation, right? I mean, including here in Canada, how many washrooms, even with so-called wheelchair signs, are really not accessible. They just have the sign on it, but it's really total fake, right? The idea that everything is accessible and we're really getting into much better, I think it's an illusion. Right? Even the perception of disabled people, I'm not so sure it really has improved. Right? I think, right, the employment numbers go down, not up. When you look at the US, for example, over the last couple of years, the employment numbers in the US is around 22% for male with disabilities, 25% for female with disabilities, right? Whereas around 70% for non-disabled people, right? And the 20% employment number we already had, right, 100 years ago. So it hasn't changed much in the US, for example. And that is the number disability. We don't even know the severity, right, because it's not segregated, right, for how many blind people, how many deaf people, because now we add more and more stuff which is called disabled, right? I mean, or right, impaired, right? By, okay, you have back pain, now you're impaired, right? And so on. The ones we traditionally talk about, like wheelchair user, blind, deaf, cognitive issues like Down syndrome, right? There are no numbers, we don't even know, but if the 20% is for all of them, for sure the numbers will be lower, not higher. So we haven't actually even improved in the last, 100 years in the US, for example. So the numbers just don't show what the public actually thinks. Well, what does it mean for disabled people to be seen as equals on levels of family, citizenship, and so on? I might be cynical here, but I think the only way that works is if the others see that the dynamic which is disempowering disabled people is actually also disempowering the other people. And they have no way of just drawing arbitrary lines and securing themselves from the same problem they do to disabled people. As long as the others can really see themselves as, oh, that's not about me, it's just about that other group, I think we never get enough consistency, right? The public will change on a fundamental level. They might change when the times are good, right? Because they might be willing to give more. But as soon as the times go bad, you will see that, right, a lot of things will be cut down again. As long as they think that dynamic, right, they can safeguard themselves, I think if the groups who were against sex selection, if we could have really convinced them that that they can't draw the line and that at the end of the day they would lose even the fight around sex selection if they draw, if they don't take the arguments of the disability community serious and just trying to, oh, it's you guys and you don't apply to us, right? If we would have been able to make the case that we are all in the same boat here, right? I think, right, then I think we would indeed had less sex selection, because it would have been all on the level of consumerism, right? Because you don't do sex selection like in the US per se for, right, because you like male more than females, right? You do it for gender balancing, right? I have 3 boys, I want a girl, right? But it's still consumerism, right? But we were not able, right? I mean, people were saying, I mean, you are a different ball game, you are a different group, right? And so as long as people don't identify with us, right, in that whatever is done to us, the dynamics is the same, right, happening to them down the road, right? And I think with the enhancement stuff in some way is, of course, the writing on the wall. What you do to people you perceive as less able on the species-typical norm, when you enhance, you just move the gauge curve further, right? So there will be people then who are enhanced, and then all by a sudden the ones who were normal, right, are now all by a sudden below the normal. That's what happened with Sputnik in some ways, right? It was not even, it was just an enhancement in requirements in school, right? And all by a sudden, kids who were normal up to then became the big pool of learning disabled, right? But they were up to up to the time Sputnik went up, they were totally normal. No one was saying anything, right? So we can move this, it's constantly moving, and so if people would understand that it's really all a shooting target, it's not, I mean, fixed in stone, and depending what develops, all by a sudden you're part of the same game and you have to run for the next thing, otherwise you're labeled as defective in the same way. I think we will never see that people really, as a social structure, really, I mean, look for a cohesive solution. We will all the time be the outlier.